Thank you, and it's a great pleasure to be here and to hear these reports on the stage at the same time. So disclosure, I'm now at the University of Cambridge. I previously directed what was then the Global Monitoring Report. In 2013 and 14, we did one on teaching and learning. So many of the messages at the beginning of Dion's presentation resonated, I think, quite strongly with the issues and analysis that we had in there. It's really important and vital that we continue to reiterate them and to have different platforms for reiterating them. And the World Bank is obviously a very strong voice, and so welcome to have this first report on education. I'd be interested, just as an aside, to know how often the WDR and GEM reports have been presented on a platform together, because I think we need more of this, not just to sort of debate the differences between them, but really to come across as a common voice, because that's going to really strengthen our messages, not to only people in this room, because we all probably believe in the importance of education, but to those that we're really wanting to convince as well. So how can we continue that collaboration, thinking about shared responsibility as part of the GEM report framework? Moving on, I think the one thing that I found very welcome across the two reports was this strong focus on the systemic issues and accountability and political economy. So, as we've heard, this idea of this learning crisis isn't new, important to reiterate it, but the question is, why does it persist and what can we do about it? And at the heart of this are these issues around political economy of reform. So just to pick up on one issue, a lot of the debate at the moment is on teaching at the right level, making sure that curriculum is at the right pace. There's a lot of important evidence, including from Lant and others, on how this is holding back addressing the learning crisis. So I was in India last week, was it, with our research teams discussing the work that we're doing there, looking at issues around teachers. One thing I just want to clarify is we really need to be careful about putting the blame on teachers in terms of talking about teacher absenteeism. Yes, there are circumstances in which teachers are absent, but understanding why they're absent. In these contexts that they were often absent because they were required to do things outside of the class. So that it's not the blame, it doesn't necessarily sit with the teachers, and looking again at the issues around who's responsible. And in these contexts, when through the more qualitative aspects of the research, we were asking why teachers, what teachers thought about how they were supporting children in the classroom, they were clearly aware that some of the children in their classes were struggling. They were clearly aware that the children who were struggling were more likely to come from disadvantaged backgrounds and needed additional support and different types of support. But at the same time, the accountability mechanisms that were there in the classroom, at the classroom level, were totally against them doing anything of the sorts of things that they knew they ought to be doing. So they were subject to monthly tests. The children in their classes were subject to monthly tests. This meant that they had to keep up with the syllabus, keep up with the curriculum. Otherwise, the children would not actually, who were able to perform, weren't going to get to the next level, and the teachers will be blamed for that. So it was in their interests to keep the children who weren't learning behind, not to support them, but rather to help those who were likely to make it to the next level. And this was really important because on the wall in the head teacher's classroom was a chart that said what the grades of the teachers were. They were marked from A to E. So they didn't want to be there in E, and that would be what happened if they were focusing on the children that were struggling. So I think thinking about accountability mechanisms, it's important to think about accountability, not just generally, but accountability for inclusion specifically. So this leads on to my question, which is, I imagine when you wrote these reports, knowing from experience from our work, that you might not always have had the evidence that you needed for some of these things. We are now working on the RISE Ethiopia programme, the Research for Improving Systems of Education, which Lant is leading. We're focusing on Ethiopia. And we are at the stage of thinking about these issues around political economy of reform. What evidence is it that you would like from this type of programme that would help to strengthen a report that was focusing on these issues in the future?